Welcome to the Progress City Radio Hour. My name is Michael Crawford. With me, as always, is my brother Jeff. Jeff, how are you today?
Brr. I am chilly. It's very cold. Actually, it was very cold in North Carolina recently, but I am cold. Cold. How are you?
It's cold out there.
Are you cold?
Cold day. Well, I know it's cold everywhere now because it's time for another snow show.
Yeah, snow show too. We're returning to a theme. I think this is the first time we've fully returned to the same theme, is it not?
Circled back, yeah, absolutely. And, snow being one of our first reboot episodes, I suppose, after our return from the dead. And that was a great show. You can go back and listen to that one. We talked about a lot of snowy Disney adventures, but turns out there's a lot more to talk about.
There is always more snow. We like snow. We would love to see snow again.
Yeah.
Please, someday. But yeah, it's Snow Show Episode 5, one of my favorite episodes, still to this day. Highly recommend it. But yeah, we're back. 60 episodes later, more snow to be had, like you said.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. So what are we going to talk about as we shush down the slopes today?
Well, you can't really talk about Disney and snow without talking about the 1960 Winter Olympics and Walt's and his team's involvement in that. That was a major pivot point, you could call it, in a lot of different areas, Disney and the Olympics and sports.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's a watershed moment, not only for Disney, but also for the Olympics, as you say. And both of those universes have been deeply affected by what happened with Walt taking over the pageantry at the 60 Winter Olympics. And, a legacy that continues to this day, and how we view the games, how we experience the games, and how the games present themselves. So it's a story that's not as well known as some others. So it's come to light a little more in recent years, and it's a fun one.
It is fun and so cool. It's like an episode of Connections. You can't believe what came from that. One of the things that came from that we're also talking about. We're talking a little bit about Mineral King, and we're talking about it with two authors, Greg Glasgow and Kathryn Meyer, who wrote the new book, Disneyland on the Mountain, Walt, the environmentalist and the ski resort that never was, about Mineral King. Michael, we love Mineral King here. Love
Mineral King. Have always been obsessed with it since learning about it from Disney News back in probably the 80s.
Oh, wow.
That this was a concept for this year-round resort Disney created up in the Sierra Nevadas, and would have been a beautiful, beautiful place. And they've written this great book that covers the story from not only the Disney side, but from all the other sides in the litigation that was going on with the government, with the Sierra Club. And so it's good that this subject finally has a book treatment, because it deserved it.
It really did. And this is, they did a great job carrying it all the way through a very long saga. And we'll talk with them a little later in the show. Now, we're also talking about another famous mountain, Disney, and in real life, the Matterhorn.
Yes, it's a real mountain as well as a Disney mountain.
Yeah. And the filming of Third Man on the Mountain over there in Zermatt, Switzerland, and a little bit of Walt and his Swiss ways. He was a big fan of Switzerland.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we should mention, since this is a snow show, Walt was just a big fan of the snow. He was a big fan of winter sports. He was an avid skier back when he was younger, and he kind of did that to get away. He played polo for a while, but then that was too harmful,
right,
too injurious to his person. So he took up skiing as a way to unwind and relax, and he and Lily would go skiing. And there's a lot of footage, actually, we mentioned on our last episode, the Christmas episode, the Christmas with Walt Disney, that's on Disney Plus now. There's a lot of footage in that, home movie footage from when Diane was very young and Walt and Lily were up at Sugar Bowl up in California and skiing up there. And there's a mountain there because Walt invested in that resort named Mount Disney. So
That's right.
There are a lot of skiing connections there.
Sheeing, if you will.
Sheeing, as you will, yes, absolutely. And that lodge appears in the cartoon, the Art of Skiing.
That's right. And if you would have listened to episode 5, you would know this.
Absolutely.
Yes. Well, I think this is a great opportunity with all the Walt era things that we're talking about today to bring back an old tradition and check in with Walt. What do you think?
Sounds good. Always good to check in with Walt.
All right, let's check in with the old man himself.
And now, your Disneyland host, Walt Disney.
Motion picture production has become a worldwide operation. Right now, we have several companies filming stories at many points in Europe, and halfway around the world at the West Indies and in far northern Canada. In the past, we filmed stories in Japan, in the South Seas, Australia, South America, Africa, and at the North and the South Poles. In our desire for authenticity and realism, these far-flung location trips often pose some real tough problems. For some time, we had felt that this story by James Ramsey Ullman would make an exciting motion picture, but only if we could film it in its actual locale, on the Matterhorn in Switzerland. We would call it Third Man on the Mountain. But once again, we were to run headlong into some difficult location problems. To get heavy camera equipment and players from the tiny alpine village of Zermatt to the top of the Killer Mountain would not be an easy task, for there's no faking with the Matterhorn. Our players were faced with hazards few actors ever have encountered before in what turned out to be one of the most perilous assignments a movie company has ever tackled.
One of Walt's favorite destinations abroad was without a doubt Switzerland. And in the late 1940s and 1950s, he and his family could frequently be found vacationing there. And like so many of his experiences, Walt brought a lot of Switzerland back with him and shared it with his audience in the 1950s and beyond. In 1953, Walt was reported as visiting Zermatt, Switzerland in advance of filming there. Zermatt lies at the base of the Matterhorn and is a charming alpine village that is only accessible by a cog railway. Walt would send one of his finest directors and Ben Sharpstein there for one of his 17 People and Places films to capture Zermatt, the Matterhorn, and other aspects of Switzerland. Michael, you gotta love the People and Places films. Wish they were all on Disney Plus remastered.
I know. These are great, and you can only get them in really shoddy, like online,
They're really
sort of
bad.
60 millimeter
Yeah.
transfers. Like some library had a beat up old 60 millimeter copy that somebody transferred to digital. They're horrible quality, but these were like Technicolor CinemaScope movies.
Yeah, they're excellent. And they were supposed to put them up and make a new reboot of them, and we have never heard back about that.
I know, that was such a tease. I mean,
I know.
that was an early hope that they were going to dig deep into the vault, that they even knew what that was.
Right,
That
right.
they even heard of these things to begin with, because it's a great concept, and these films are a lot of fun.
They are, and this one definitely is. The soundtrack from the Switzerland People and Places film would also be released, along with the soundtrack to the Samoa film. Quite an A-side, B-side combo there.
Yeah, I have a copy of that.
It's, oh, wow. Yeah.
It's, I mean, how can you turn down that Switzerland cover, flip it over, and it's Samoa.
And the beautiful artwork is too.
Oh, so good.
Clearly, the People and Places were seen as the next step in the Disney Studios offerings, along with the True Life Adventure series. Switzerland, the People and Places film, would be released in 1955 and share a bill with Lady and the Tramp, both being shot in CinemaScope. Now, what a bill that was.
That's a fun night at the movies. Yeah.
That's right. Shortly after Disneyland opened and Switzerland was debuted, Walt heard of a prototype transportation system being developed in Bern, Switzerland. And according to the Nickel Tour of Disneyland, he managed to buy one of these systems before even deciding where it would go. Yeah, Walt and his futuristic transportation. Eventually, however, he placed it traveling from Fantasyland to Tomorrowland and back, and so the Skyway came to Disneyland in one of its first expansions in June of 1956. The Skyway was made by the Von Roll Company and was the 101 type sky ride. It would go on to be ubiquitous in stateside amusement parks for decades to come, but in the mid-1950s, guests would glide from land to land over Holiday Hill, which was made from fill that excavators had dumped there during Disneyland's construction. You could float by Captain Hook's boat, which must have been a great vantage point, and either depart from or land in a beautifully crafted Swiss chalet. This Swiss chalet over in Disneyland is really wonderful, as was the one at Walt Disney World, of course.
As was. I miss the one at Walt Disney World so much. I think about it a lot. Like when I'm in that park, it's like, oh, it would be so great to go on the Skyway.
So beautiful. A little, intricate. Well-themed.
Yes, very.
This chalet would host the opening ceremonies of the Skyway, attended by Walt Disney and the Swiss Consul General of Los Angeles. What a post that is.
Yeah, you wonder how much business Switzerland has in LA, but I don't know. You never know.
Could be. A platform hosted dancers in the Swiss folk style who danced around and made merry, as can be seen in a Disneyland TV special broadcast later that year. As Walt pondered what to put on Holiday Hill, perhaps a toboggan ride, producer Bill Anderson brought him a book to be adapted into a motion picture. The book was Banner in the Sky, a Newbery Award-winning novel by James Ramsey Ullman, based loosely on The Climbing of the Matterhorn by Edward Whymper in 1865. Walt, of course, jumped at the script. I mean, it's Switzerland. Couldn't hurt that a visit to the set would mean going to Zermatt and being able to enjoy its rustic charms. I mean, Walt and these location pictures.
I was about to say, you can always gauge Walt's enthusiasm by the ones that he actually went to, like, keep an eye on things on set and just
make sure it's
kind of hang out. It's like Great Locomotive Chase. Yeah, I'll just go check it out, see what's happening.
Yeah, I'm just going to get put around the set. Well, Bill Anderson would be placed in the role as producer, which he would do for years to come on so many classic Disney films. For director, Ken Anakin would be tapped. Anakin was an alum of two of Disney's post-war British films, being tapped by one of Disney's legendary producers, Perce Pierce, who had recently passed away in 1955. Pierce picked Anakin to direct Robin Hood and His Merry Men in 1952, and Anakin would also direct The Sword and the Rose in 1953. In the mid-1950s, Disney was making more ambitious live-action fare. We've profiled a little of this ambition with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which we talk about in episode 44, and of course, The Great Locomotive Chase in episodes 46 and 47. A lot of the movies of this period were a little serious and involved ambitious filmmaking and a lot of research and historical accuracy more often than not. It really was the Shaggy Dog in 1959 that busted open this formula and made way for what would be the signature of Disney live-action films for years, the kind of lower-budget comedy. But these movies prior to that were very special and paved the way for classics that would come along later, such as Swiss Family Robinson. I love this era of Disney films. They're a little stoic at times, but they're always so well made.
Yeah, the art direction of everything's always so good, and they do these location shoots and just really throw everything, like you said, just the research and that goes into them. They really throw everything at the wall, and I'm kind of interested in the alternate universe where Shaggy Dog didn't happen and they sort of continued in this mode, because you think of other, like Darby O'Gill, and there are a bunch of these films that, like you said, a little stoic, I mean, maybe sometimes a little stodgy, but they're really well done.
Yeah. Third Man on the Mountain would share a lot of DNA with Swiss Family Robinson. Anakin would direct the movie, and it would star two stars from Third Man on the Mountain, James MacArthur and Janet Munro. While Munro was selected by Walt for Darby O'Gill and the Little People, MacArthur was chosen for the movie The Light in the Forest due to his role in another film called The Young Strangers, where he played a troubled youth. I can't believe Walt would go in for that.
I know. Bring a little edge.
Troubled youth. He was the son of one of our favorites, Helen Hayes, and he would go on to star in 4 Disney films. And though David Niven was reportedly signed on to play Captain John Winter, it would be Michael Rennie that would eventually take the role.
I like Michael Rennie, but it's fascinating to think of David Niven doing it.
Yes.
It's sort of peak David Niven.
Right. Well, he had interviewed remotely, evidently, and perhaps when he got to Zermatt, he realized this shoot would not be for him. I don't know if he got that far or not. Perhaps the strenuous life, too much for David Niven. I don't know.
Yeah, he's a gentleman scholar.
Yes. The filmmakers had a vision of a movie that would push the envelope of filmmaking in its depiction of mountain climbing. And to that end, they recruited mountaineer and filmmaker Gaston Riboufat from Chamonix, France, in their efforts as a second unit director. Bill Anderson had seen one of Riboufat's films around the time he found Banner in the Sky and thought his skill as a climber and filmmaker would be the perfect fit for the material they would base the film off of. He also had a good deal of notoriety in the climbing community for being a member of the first expedition to summit Annapurna and was the first man to climb all 6 of the great north faces of the Alps. Some stuff that sounds impressive, but sure.
Right.
Fortunately, Riboufat not only directed the second unit, but helped put together a documentary chronicling the production of Third Man on the Mountain that was eventually packaged with more climbing footage of his and broadcast on the Disneyland TV show under the title Perilous Assignment. According to Anakin, he and Walt spent 3 months in Burbank working on Third Man on the Mountain, with Riboufat joining for a week. Then Riboufat was off to Chamonix to work with doubles on footage for the film, which Anakin would later recreate if possible with his crew of actors that would need to learn how to climb mountains and stuff. Perilous indeed.
Yes, that assignment is definitely perilous.
It's very perilous. For 3 months, Disney's crew would work out of Zermatt on the slopes of the Matterhorn and other nearby peaks, and the results were stunning. First, the actors had to actually learn to climb, so they set about doing extensive training for several weeks. According to Munro, quote, "The first day we went up 20 feet. 2 days later, we climbed the top of the Riffelhorn, 9,660 feet.
Jeez.
MacArthur, who was, according to himself, quote, vegetating at Harvard, was a particular climbing nut and took to mountaineering with great vigor, which figures, he's always the athletic type in all these movies.
He's an enthusiast. Yeah, I believe it.
And with Zermatt already being a rustic village, care was taken to dress the town even more. And the village, after much discussion, gave Disney wide access, even breaking their prohibition of gasoline-powered vehicles by letting Disney use trucks and Unimogs, a Jeep-type style of vehicle made by Mercedes-Benz, which is all over this documentary, the Unimogs. Which is,
keep your Unimogs out of our town.
Right. Disney hired a team of local guides and a whole lot of mules to help port gear far up above Zermatt. And though the actors rode up in an aerial tramway and via helicopter later, they certainly were expected to participate in climbing and all kinds of harrowing activities. As the Unimogs hauled gear above Zermatt, the documentary shows fences being dismantled to make way for the trucks. And finally, when the trucks could go no higher, it was the mules that would take over and carry all manner of film equipment, food, and climbing gear higher and higher up the mountain. Anakin would scout locations via helicopter, and a frequent pilot for this and ferrying the stars back and forth was Hermann Geiger, a famous Swiss aviator who often performed rescue missions and was the first pilot to land successfully on a glacier and perform rescues. So they were clearly safe, or were they?
Why would you be out on a glacier to begin with?
Why would you want to fly out? Yeah, good question. That was a lot of my questioning of couldn't they have done this with the Matterhorn in the background? Why? Why so perilous? I feel that way with a lot of mountaineering stuff. It's yeah.
Why so perilous?
Why so perilous? Is it necessary? The scene between MacArthur and Rennie, filmed in a crevasse, was particularly challenging and is featured in the documentary. This so-called Operation Ice Ledge took place on a glacier near Monte Rosa, Switzerland's tallest mountain. 9 pack mules were loaded with supplies, including lunch, at a base camp at 6,200 feet and climbed for 2 hours to the glacier. The advance unit had to trek from the base camp to glacier by foot because they could not fly due to the weather. Later in the morning, the remaining 46 members of the crew flew in 2 helicopters, shuttling the crew back and forth, each carrying the passengers 2 at a time. So that's a lot of trips. Mm-hmm. Finally, all reached the glacier at an altitude of 9,300 feet. 5 weeks previous, when the site had been chosen, the fissure was 5 feet wide, and Anakin and the crew planned a camera scaffold made of tubular steel. By the time the crew arrived to build it, it was 17 feet wide, so this was another perilous assignment, and it took about all that they had to build it. The camera scaffold went 40 feet down into the 85-foot deep crevasse. I mean, no, not at all. And Rennie was lowered by a steel ladder and with a rope around his waist, but it was removed for filming. Same for MacArthur, who had a rope around his ankle because he was on the ledge rescuing Rennie's character in the film. But the rope was removed during the filming. So he, one move he could have died or been very seriously injured.
Yes.
Rennie's hands bled from the ice, but everyone was convinced the results would be wonderful, and indeed they were. I mean, that scene specifically, it's just so vivid and clear that it's real.
Not on a soundstage.
It's just amazing that they did that, especially at this time in filmmaking. Yes, a lot of stuff was made on sound stages at this time.
I mean,
still.
You think of like movies, contemporary movies. I'm not sure there are certain to be ones about mountain climbing and whatever. I guarantee you, none of them are like this.
Right? Well, they weren't. I mean, that's the thing. They definitely weren't. If the acting was impressive, it was for good reason. According to one newspaper report, when Walt was remarking about the, quote, fear-stricken expressions on your face when you, James MacArthur, and James Donald cling to the side of the mountain, to Michael Rennie replied, "That's not acting. When we looked scared up there, Walt, we were scared."
Yeah.
For some, the fear was more justified than others. Supporting actor James Donald fell 18 feet and sustained minor injuries. An assistant cameraman fell into a crevasse and sustained 3 broken ribs. And even Gaston Rebufat was injured in filming. So, not for the faint of heart. For Janet Munro and James MacArthur, however, it was all sorts of fun. And they loved telling the story of how on a morning off, MacArthur just left and, in the spirit very true to his character, climbed the Matterhorn and made everyone very nervous in hindsight.
Scamp.
It's total scamp. In the documentary, we see the Unimogs climbing higher than any truck has ever climbed before. Rebufat and the other climbers summited the Matterhorn and filmed for record times with 60-pound packs of equipment.
No.
Stars are moving gear along with the crew. We see all kinds of heavy equipment, lights, fans, film, some of which is dumped down the mountain, which gives me the vapors, being carted around all in this incredible production. As Walt said in the documentary, quote, "Our desire for authenticity and realism," unquote, was a major priority for Disney live action in those days, and it showed. I mean, golly. The work that they did.
Yeah. I mean, that was a commitment that they really didn't need to make, considering the state of regular filmmaking at that time.
Yeah.
But he wouldn't settle.
Well, a lot of these films you watch now in digital remastered, and the process shots really show.
Yeah.
And then, watching this, it was just like, there were just none, really. I mean, just a few. But really, mostly, it's just like beautiful, clear mountain, people on mountain.
Yeah.
It's just wild. In the end, the film would cost $2 million to produce. Disney legend Peter Ellenshaw was on hand to do matte paintings on location, which I still don't understand the matte paintings on location. But of course, all his work is wonderful. You know, so many incredible shots in this film. Matte paintings had to be the exception more than the rule. And as per the other rule of these 1950s Disney dramas, there had to be a few songs. And again, this was the case. The headliner song was called Climb the Mountain and was written by Franklin Marks and a guy named By Dunham, which, I mean, what a great nickname is By, B-Y.
How's it going, By?
Marks was a Disney fixture who was relatively new to the company, joining up in 1955. A lot of 55ers. That'd be an interesting podcast to do, like the people who started in 55 for various reasons. But Marks would orchestrate many classic Disney films, from The Great Locomotive Chase all the way to The Castaway Cowboy, after which he retired. Work on The Parent Trap, 101 Dalmatians, Absent-Minded Professor, Sword in the Stone, and on in between. But this is a rare trip to the composer's chair for him, and this song will be used quite often in the anthology show, which we'll get to in a bit. Dunham, was involved in lots of TV and film, would help write the Flipper theme.
Ooh, that's a catchy one.
Yeah. Similar to him was podcast favorite Tom Adair, who helped pen the song Goodnight Valet with Georges Henny. Adair was a lyricist who would become a writer for TV and film. He wrote the lyrics to the songs from Sleeping Beauty, and his true claim to fame for us was being the writer for the TV special The Mouseketeers at Walt Disney World.
That is a long, winding road right there.
He came up with that that great father-son plot line. Folk dancers from Zermatt and beyond would join Janet Monroe for a performance as Goodnight Valet played on. All of it made for a very charming feature, and few are more charmed than Walt himself, who I have to believe partially required these location shoots so he could vacation there. I mean, really.
Yeah.
Walt spent a lot of time in Zermatt staring at the Matterhorn, so perfectly framed by the village and surrounding countryside, and thought back to his mound of fill called Holiday Hill at Disneyland, and had an epiphany of sorts, sending a postcard to the famous mountain to Imagineer Vic Green, writing simply, "Build this." I imagine him being like, what is he talking about? Just build this.
Whatever, Walt.
And so the seed of the Matterhorn and all Disney mountains afterward would be planted. And in 1959, joined by another cadre of folk dancers on a platform and mountain climbers supplied by the Sierra Club, the Matterhorn would open in man-made form in Anaheim. From then onward, Buddy Baker and other composers would frequently use the song Climb the Mountain as a theme on the anthology show whenever the Matterhorn was featured, one that I never knew until later.
No, me neither. It was just like the Matterhorn theme.
So it is.
Always use it.
Matterhorn is Disney IP.
Yeah, it's true.
And for Walt, he would have his own little piece of Switzerland with him right at the end of Main Street.
Climb the mountain, climb the highest mountain, climb the mountain, climb the highest mountain, climb the mountain, touch the sun. You can do it, you're the one.
There had to be a first time, nothing is quite that far. I'm gonna climb that mountain, catch myself a star.
At the top a man is free, just as free as he can be. There before your very eyes lies the world you love. Climbing the highest mountain, I know that I for one will shout from the highest mountain, yes, it can be done. Yes, it can be done.
For the 8th Olympic Winter Games of 1960, the eyes of the world will focus on a hitherto little-known spot lying almost on the border between California and Nevada. This is historic territory, full of the romance of the early West. The Comstock Lode in Virginia City, Lake Tahoe, and Snowshoe Thompson, himself one of the first skiers of the New World. And, of course, Reno, Nevada, only 40 or so miles away. What brings this most exciting and colorful of all the Olympic competitions to this place, known up to now to just a few local skiers? The chain of events began as an idea in the mind of Alexander Cushing, one of the owners and operators of Squaw Valley Lodge. He and the local people have long known that it is one of the finest natural amphitheaters in the world for winter sports. It has a valley floor 6,200 feet above sea level that's half a mile wide by a couple of miles long. It has three principal peaks, Squaw, KT-22, and Papoose, each one an excellent spot for skiing. Average snow depth in February, 96 inches. Average temperature, 26 degrees. The setting and the climate add up to a wonderful spot for the games. The story of the selection of Squaw Valley is a drama in itself.
When Walt began to explore beyond the boundaries of Disneyland for future recreational ventures, he looked first to the great outdoors as a way of gaining experience for his management team and exposure to an audience beyond that of Southern California. We've talked in the past about how Denver's Celebrity Sports Center once served as an incubator for future Walt Disney World management, but even before that, the Disney organization gained valuable logistical experience in a most unexpected place, the 1960 Olympic Winter Games. In doing so, Walt and his team did a lot to define what we now consider the modern Olympic experience. Jeff, the Olympics weren't always the Olympics.
That's true, and it's unbelievable how many things have their roots with Walt and the gang here.
Yeah, it really is. Like when you think of it now, it's this like multi-billion-dollar TV rights.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Huge spectacle. They start advertising it a year beforehand, and everything is just so polished. And back in the day, it was just some folks up in the mountains just kind of doing their own thing.
For the love of the game. Yeah, I mean, you think about all the production value now, it is a far cry from where it was.
Yeah, and it all started with Walt.
That's right.
Kind of. It's fitting that Walt would have been involved in the 1960 Winter Games because the whole enterprise really feels like something straight out of one of his movies. 1960 marked the 8th iteration of the Winter Games. Hard to believe, just the 8th. To host the event, the International Olympic Committee picked the locality of Squaw Valley, California, now known as Palisades, Tahoe. When the site selection was announced in 1955, it shocked the world. The winter sports epicenters of Europe had been shut out, and in their place, the IOC had picked a fledgling resort that one voter didn't even believe actually existed. When the head of the IOC, Avery Brundage, found out that the U.S. Olympic Committee had nominated Squaw Valley for consideration, he proclaimed that they had taken leave of their senses. And it's easy to understand why. Squaw Valley at the time did, in fact, barely exist. It featured only one chairlift, 2 tow ropes, and a 50-room lodge. The resort's Olympic bid was thought to be a publicity stunt by Squaw Valley's only resident, Alexander Cushing, a Harvard-educated lawyer who had left a promising legal career to become the owner and operator of the resort, which is very Snowball Express.
This is just such a wild story that they actually got it. And, it was at a time where they just didn't think they could do it outside of Europe in general. So, I mean.
Right, yeah.
What a coup this was.
Yeah, America had the wacky idea, well, let's enter one of ours. And like a place in California, that's crazy. And then this guy just kind of worms his way in with his shabby resort that no one had ever seen or heard of. So it's pretty wild. Cushing later said he had no more interest in getting the games than the man in the moon. And considering the state of Squaw Valley at the time, you can see his bid was mostly bluster. His ski resort had seen many, many setbacks since its opening in 1949. There had been fires and floods and avalanches and all sorts of shenanigans. When he found out that California was going to submit an Olympic bid, he pulled some strings at the San Francisco Examiner and in the state Senate, backroom deals to get Squaw Valley into the discussion. He was a hype man, for sure.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. Despite the resort's sparse nature, Cushing presented it as a blank slate upon which a world-class facility could be custom built to suit the Olympic needs. And miraculously, enough people believed him that Squaw Valley beat out the Austrian city of Innsbruck 32 votes to 30 when they voted for the games. This was a coup, and people were angry about it.
Well, yeah, I bet they were.
They were. The entire story of Squaw Valley's founding and the Olympic bid that followed are a fascinating tale. I encourage you to seek out online the 2021 documentary Magic in the Mountains, for which I served as a consultant. It tells the story not only of the making of the resort, but how the games came there and what Walt contributed to the efforts. So if you want to dig deeper into how this place all came together, because it's not really relevant to the Disney side of it, but it is a crazy story about how this place all evolved in the first place. But speaking of Walt, he came into the picture in 1958 when organizing committee president Prentice Hale visited the Disney studio in Burbank, and he joined Walt for lunch and asked him to become chairman of the pageantry committee for the upcoming games. This would involve programming the opening and closing ceremonies, the medal ceremonies for each event, and the Olympic torch relay. Walt agreed, saying later, "I didn't know then what I was getting into."
Sit down over some chili, and then later you're the chairman of the pageantry committee.
Yeah, one bowl of chili later,
That's
and
right.
you're coughing up your crackers because you've committed to something. To form his new organization, Walt turned to veteran Disney employees as well as friends and colleagues. Ron Miller, an assistant director at the studio, who was also Walt's son-in-law, and the future president and CEO of the company, was named pageantry coordinator. Jack Bruner, also an assistant director as well as a production coordinator at the studio, was named to the pageantry committee. Another pageantry committee member was Tom Leach, who had started at the studio in 1955. He served later as an assistant director on Mary Poppins. He went on to be a producer or director on several other projects. In fact, he produced Snowball Express. Could it be a coincidence?
There you go.
It's all connected.
Commentary.
Really, a memoir of things past. Joseph McEvity, who was named the Olympic Torch Relay Director, had served at the studio as an assistant director. He too worked on Mary Poppins. He also worked on Son of Flubber, That Darn Cat, and more. As a writer, he penned the screenplays for the Dexter Riley trilogy of comedies, as well as The Barefoot Executive, Hot Lead and Cold Feet, and others in the 1970s. McEvity came from a Hollywood family. His brother Vincent would become a live-action director for Disney, where he worked on a number of films in the 1970s. Many, many big names there. And Gus, after all.
Yes.
Meanwhile, studio manager Edsel Curry became director of special projects. Walt Disney Productions vice president Card Walker, who had started in the mailroom in 1938 and would go on to be president, CEO, and chairman of the board, was named director of publicity. Following a luncheon at the studio in late 1959, where Walt described the upcoming pageantry program to reporters and broadcasters, Card's team would send out regular bulletins to keep the press up to date. I always picture like Card Walker going around with like his scoop hat on, like press, media.
A pile of papers. Like, here you go. Here.
Dealing with all like the fast talking guys. Yeah. Among the friends that Walt pulled into things was Art Linkletter, television star and host of Disneyland's live opening special, who became the vice president in charge of entertainment. Also invited was Western Airlines president Terrell Drinkwater, who was named vice chairman in charge of budget. Filling the role of pageantry director was Tommy Walker, a truly legendary figure in Disneyland entertainment. Once the band leader for the University of Southern California, where he was called Tommy the Toe, which makes me laugh every time. He was called Tommy the Toe because he served as both band leader and place kicker on the football team.
How does that work?
So he would jump out of the stands and go kick, like put on his helmet and go kick, and then run back and put on his like band leader.
It's like something from Son of Flubber in its own right.
It is very Son of Flubber. Tommy the Toe was at the time the director of customer relations at Disneyland. Jeff, Tommy Walker was a dude.
Clearly. I mean, gosh.
I mean, just from that. My favorite bit of trivia is that in 1946 at USC, he composed the Charge fanfare that everybody knows
Yes.
from sports events. The
That's right.
charge.
I mean, we need a USC football episode or segment on this podcast at some
I'm
point.
telling you, we do. It would be like the CSI board of like
That's right.
thread all and like pinned on a board all together to make the web of
connections.
USC
Yeah.
football. Yeah.
That's right.
It's like the USC football mafia ran Disney pretty
It's
much
true.
for a while.
It's true.
Aside from the charge fanfare, Tommy Walker had gone to USC in the early 40s. He left for World War II, then he came back. He had an offer from the Washington football team to play pro ball, but stayed at USC to run the band. He was very dedicated to the band.
That's
So
really
he chose that over pro football.
Paid off.
Yeah, paid off big time. In the 1950s, Walt saw the halftime show at the Rose Bowl, which Tommy had put together, and hired him to do Disneyland's opening ceremonies. This is very fitting. His dad, Visi Walker, was Disneyland's band leader, and for a long time,
And was also a boss.
was also big time, and can be seen on old TV specials. There's that LP of Disneyland Band that he's on, and
See him in that Disneyland People in Places where they have the riverboat and the band.
Yes.
All the bands playing together.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a family connection there. And so Tommy would become Disneyland's director of entertainment, which he did for 12 years, during which he'd introduced the concept of nightly fireworks and events such as date night at Disneyland and more. I mean, think about it. You're the guy who introduced nightly fireworks at Disney, and that's the thing for 60 years now or whatever.
Yeah. Wow.
Pretty crazy. Walt once told him, "Everything you do is fireworks, balloons, pigeons, and flags." Which, I mean, when you think about up until maybe like the 90s, that every Disney thing, that's exactly what it was. Every big celebration, fireworks, balloons, pigeons, and flags.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Tommy would go on to work on any number of significant non-Disney events, including Reagan's 1981 inaugural, the 1986 Statue of Liberty Centennial, 5 World's Fairs, 3 Super Bowls, and 3 Olympics, including the 1960 and 1984 games.
Yeah, man. Some real pageantry right there.
Big pageantry guy. As part of his Olympic duties, Tommy Walker hit the road to line up support for the event. He conferred in Salt Lake City with the president of the Music Educators National Conference about recruiting young musicians for the festivities, and sought the help of Japan's largest fireworks manufacturer in developing the ceremony's pyrotechnics. So he was all over the place. Supervising the musical aspects of the production were choral director Dr. Charles Hurt from the University of Southern California, who we've met before, and band director Clarence Sawhill from UCLA. Hurt was a legendary and influential choral director who served at USC from 1941 until 1976. He was also the choral director of Disneyland from the late 1950s until the early 1980s. He was originally brought in by Walt in December 1955 to stage the Dickensian Carolers at Christmas in Disneyland. By 1958, this entertainment offering was the thing that evolved into the Candlelight Processional. So that was him. Hurt would direct the Candlelight Processional at Disneyland for 25 years. He also conducted the opening of Walt Disney World, the honor choir for the opening and closing ceremonies of the 1984 Olympics, and the rededication ceremonies for the Statue of Liberty in 1986. A common thread
Always that.
is a Liberty Weekend.
Yeah.
After a meeting between Tommy Walker and the Music Educators National Conference in March 1959, the committee was granted permission to work with the California and Nevada Music Educators Associations to recruit musicians and singers from public high schools in those states. And the response was overwhelming. When applications were distributed in fall 1959, more than 30 bands and 70 choral groups applied to be a part of the Olympic ceremonies. After listening to hours of mailed-in auditions, imagine that in those days, Hurt and his committee selected 18 bands and 37 choruses from the 2 states. A musical program was chosen for the event, and in December 1959, Hurt and Sawhill gathered at UCLA to record a demo of the choral and instrumental numbers to distribute to participating schools. Groups practiced first individually and then in one of 4 regional rehearsals held in Reno, San Francisco, Fresno, and Los Angeles. This was not a free ride. Students had to raise money back home to fund their trip to Squaw Valley. But all told, 3,600 students participated, so not bad.
Don't understand how they coordinate this stuff.
I know, I imagine sending out all these packages full of reel-to-reel tapes or whatever. It's pretty crazy. Youth participation was critical to the success of the 1960 games, acting as official flag raisers, messengers, and crowd control during the event, which I'm just imagining all these kids doing crowd control. 125 Explorer Scouts under the leadership of Scoutmaster William King. Walt was quoted as saying, "I have always said that the spirit of American youth cannot be daunted, and I think this was dramatically proven by their unselfish and wholehearted effort before and during the 8th Olympic Winter Games," which I'm sure just Walt just ripped that right off the cuff.
Right.
Yeah. The youth effort extended to the all-important torch relay, which brought the Olympic flame by foot more than 600 miles from the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, which had been site of the 1932 Olympic Summer Games, up to Squaw Valley. More than 700 high school runners from the California Interscholastic Federation took part, joined by a number of former Olympic champions. The athletes were each assigned 1-mile sections of the route where they practiced by toting 8-pound shot puts. But meanwhile, the rush was on to create an Olympics-worthy resort from the rather rustic Squaw Valley development. It was estimated that 2,000 visitors a day arrived in the summer of 1959 to tour the construction site. Walt himself made several visits to coordinate the entertainment efforts. Aside from the obvious patriotic appeal of helping out with the Olympics, it's easy to see what might have appealed to him about these specific games. The 1960 Olympics were to be full of innovations and firsts, which was always a draw for Walt. And, this was a time when he had started to mull over building his own city of the future. So he was on the lookout for innovations.
Well, that and just so many other things that he was doing at this time that's kind of branching out. So this seems right in line with, he's working on all kinds of little germs for ideas like CalArts and beyond. So
it's interesting to see how, his involvement makes perfect sense just when you look at it in isolation. But when you look at it in the context of the larger narrative, it's like, oh, well, that's where it fits in. It really does fit in to the larger arc of his sort of creative interest. So, the list of Olympic firsts in this games was very long, aside from the pageantry. Previous Olympics had lodged guests and athletes in local hotels and homes because they would have them in some place like Innsbruck, where there were hotels and there were local hostels and there were places to put people. Squaw Valley was very remote. It needed the construction of custom-built housing for participants. So the very first Olympic village, consisting of 4 dormitories, was created. This was the first Olympic village. It was the first time they had to build like a dining hall and all these other facilities to put the athletes in. It was also the first time they used artificial ice in Olympic history for skating events. Waste heat from the refrigeration plant, which made the artificial ice, was used to heat buildings and melt snow from roofs and provide hot water, that is very like Reedy Creek, Walt Disney World, Epcot.
Absolutely. And this was catnip for Walt, and that village is very in line with his kind of small world stream that's also going, people in places, small world, get people together, Walt of this time frame as well.
People to people.
People to people, of course. Yes, thank you.
Well, and it's a thread that would continue in early planning for Epcot, where World Showcase students, youth coming to work at World Showcase would live in an international village that was designed to be like an Olympic village. So you can see how that idea stuck with them, even, 15 years later. Other technical innovations at the games included new timekeeping equipment capable of measuring time to the 100th of a second. IBM also supplied 15 technicians and 2 RAMAC computers to tabulate results and output data in English and French. That's exciting. For the first time, television rights were sold for the games. CBS bought the exclusive rights for $50,000.
That's insane.
Yes. Quite a steal there. The network eventually broadcast 31 hours of coverage during the games. At one point, officials needed to consult tape of an event to determine whether a skier had missed a slalom gate, and that inspired the concept of instant replay. So it all goes back to these Olympics.
Right. Lots of innovation.
But aside from the technical whiz-bang nature of the 1960 games, there were a lot of aesthetic innovations, and most of those were due directly to Disney's involvement. The look of the games was heavily influenced by longtime Disney artist, designer, and Imagineer John Hinch, who was named decor director for the games.
Nice.
At Walt's suggestion, and inspired by the ancient Greek custom of commemorating Olympic champions with marble sculptures, Hinch designed 30 16-foot snow statues, quote unquote, for placement along the Avenue of the Athletes and in other significant locations throughout Squaw Valley. So these were essentially, I'm not sure what they were made of, but, essentially, let's just say large papier-mâché athletes made to look like they were sculpted from snow and in honor of the marble statues. And, Hinch taking a big role there. To learn about snow sculpting techniques, he had visited the Dartmouth College Winter Carnival and Ice Festival in February of 1959, as well as a similar event in Quebec, which I bet the Quebec Winter Carnival Festival is quite a show.
Oh, yeah.
I'd love to see that. So Hinch went around touring all these places. He then designed the statues, which were created by Floats Inc. of Pasadena. So like a parade float company. So these were not built to last, obviously, but they're quite effective. 9 of the statues were female, 21 were male. There were 2 larger 24-foot statues, 1 male and 1 female, created to flank the Tower of Nations. Now, the tower, which was another Hinch design, stood 79 feet tall and 20 feet wide. Suspended on this metallic grid, it was just kind of like a large metal grid, and suspended upon it were the Olympic rings and 30 aluminum crests, each 5 feet by 6, representing the participant nations. This was a really cool-looking visual centerpiece for the games.
So cool, and it has some of that feel of that kind of great Art Deco public art as well. Just kind of a classic, beautiful piece, but very Greco as well.
It's like an old time Art Deco hood ornament.
Yeah, it is.
It just looks really cool. It's very nice work by Mr. Hinch, unsurprisingly. This tower marked the staging area where the opening and closing ceremonies were held, as well as the medal ceremonies for each competition. Now, this was another innovation for the games, as victory ceremonies had traditionally not been held for public viewing, which is kind of crazy. Now, of course, they are the televised highlight of the events, but they had previously been out of sight. Around the plaza, occupied by the Tower of Nations, were 30 aluminum flagpoles, 1 each for the 30 participating nations. The effort to build the Squaw Valley facilities was an expensive one, so sponsorships took on an importance previously unknown in Olympic history. To help offset the tens of millions of dollars in construction costs, corporations, cities, and individuals were approached to sponsor individual flagpoles and snow sculptures. Sponsor names were engraved on the items, and they were allowed to claim them after the games had ended. So, for $2,000, one could purchase one of the snow statues. Palm Springs, Pasadena, Burbank, and Inglewood were among the cities that agreed to do so. I'm not sure what good they would prove you after the games, but it's a nice little bit of PR. Other sponsors included director Frank Capra, architect Welton Beckett, and the Celebrity Sports Center. It's crazy thing, as commercial as the games are now, that it started off with like, who are some of Walt Disney's friends who can buy a flagpole?
Right. Somebody's got to buy those flagpoles.
The flagpoles are still around, a lot of them. Some of them can be found in locations as widespread as the Walt Disney Studios Commissary in Burbank, the Walt Disney Elementary School in Marceline, Missouri, and the first tee of the La Quinta Country Club in La Quinta, California. And we've seen the ones in Burbank.
That's right. They should move one down to the Wide World of Sports.
Oh, they really should. That's a great idea.
Put a little plaque by it. Come on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Disney also helped fund a symphonic carillon, which rang out 3 times a day and could be heard throughout the valley. Installed by a Los Angeles electronic engineer, the 161-bell carillon and 61-note vibrachord harp used 24 speakers and was provided to the Olympic Committee without cost. I feel like Walt took a loss on all this stuff because he was sponsoring flagpoles and buying carillons, and he was into it.
A lot going on.
This carillon leads me to my favorite Disney contribution to these Olympics, Dee Fisher. Dee Fisher was the official organist of the Winter Olympics, but his home base was at Disneyland, where he was the manager and player at the Wurlitzer Music Hall on Main Street.
Ooh, yeah.
He even recorded an LP, Echoes of Disneyland, for Disneyland Records, which I highly recommend you seek out.
It's a really great record.
It's so moody. It's like you can imagine the organ echoing down Main Street after close.
Yeah,
in the park,
it's
echoing
super moody. Yes,
it's magnificent. And Dee Fisher was very prominent in looking for stories about his work here at the Olympics. I found he toured America as, the Disneyland and Olympic organist is here at your town in Mississippi to perform tonight at the Rotary Hall or whatever. So he was out and about, Dee Fisher.
That's nice. We had a little Disneyland concert tonight. It was very nice.
It was nice. He was at the Olympics, One lasting John Hinch contribution to the Olympic legacy was the torch. While torches had been used in previous games, of course, John Hinch completely redesigned the version used in 1960. Subsequent games have adapted their torches to local cultural traditions, but their overall forms all harken back to Hinch's design. And it was a good one, too. One popped up on eBay recently, and it was very expensive, but I was like, It's a cool-looking torch. Aside from its artistic contributions, the Disney organization also lent its growing experience in crowd logistics to the games. Disney helped with ticketing, parking, and security for the games. In fact, future Disney legend Bill Sully Sullivan was in charge of security, which I think he'd be good at. Yeah. Don't argue with the mustache. All did not go smoothly in the run-up to the games, however. Walt had originally announced plans for the torch to be flown from Olympia, Greece by jet airliner to Los Angeles. But the Greek Olympic Committee did not receive a request to ignite the flame at Olympia until January 1960 and refused to do so for what they claimed were logistical reasons. We can't do that. So there was a last-minute shuffle in the plans, and that meant a return to the ritual followed during the 1952 Winter Games in Oslo, where the torch was ignited at the chalet of Norwegian skiing pioneer Sondre Nordheim.
That's sure.
Yeah, and an alternate plan, but apparently it's a very coveted spot, a hallowed ground,
Right.
The chalet of Sondre Nordheim. Also uncooperative were officials in Melbourne, Australia, site of a recent Summer Olympics, to whom Disney technicians wrote for a formula that could fuel the torch throughout the games. The Australians refused to divulge their secrets, so Disney staffers had to concoct their own fuel mixture. Why is everybody just being difficult?
Yeah, I mean, that's against the spirit of the proceedings, right?
That is definitely against the Olympic spirit. And even the bird community caused trouble. Squaw Valley was the first Winter Olympics to feature a release of doves at the opening ceremony. Tommy Walker was involved, after all, so there had to be doves. But it was worried that doves would linger in the valley and freeze to death. Homing pigeons were recruited to play the role of doves of peace, quote unquote, since they would know to leave the valley and return home after they were released. This allegedly troubled the fellow in charge of the ice rink, who was wary of releasing thousands of nervous birds over his pristine new ice rink. So the schedule of events was shuffled so that the ceremonial cannons would fire only after the pigeons had been released and were heading for home.
Makes sense.
Yeah. More complications came when it was decided to use the original Olympic anthem that had been written for the first modern games in Athens in 1896. The Disney musical department attempted to obtain a score from Olympic headquarters in Switzerland to no avail. Eventually, they were able to track down a copy in Japan, but it was in Japanese and they had to decipher it as best they could. I don't know what was especially Japanese about the music itself, but anyway, they had trouble with it. I just can't believe how many problems they had with people not cooperating. That's not
the
helpful.
deal. Yeah, come on.
Even John Hinch's giant snow statues encountered trouble on the way from Pasadena. A tarp on one of the diesel trucks transporting them came loose, and its exhaust covered the white statues with soot. Especially, I would imagine, a 1960 truck being especially sooty.
Yeah.
Bob Henry, the executive vice president of Floats, Inc., who had been tasked to build and deliver the statues, was forced to find a way to wash them as quickly as possible. After delivery, 100-mile-an-hour winds at the Olympic site blew one of the statues over. The press reported that Henry soon left for New York to get as far away from the statues as possible. At last, the time for the games neared. California's racing pigeon organizations visited to make trial runs with their doves of peace. The day before the ceremony, the combined bands had their first group rehearsal. 4 Army cannons firing 4-inch shells were brought in and aimed at surrounding mountains to prevent avalanches. But aside from snow, there was a torrential rain the week before that everybody was worried would wipe out the parking lots, which had been made of packed snow. It was another innovation. They were like, we can make parking lots out of packing down snow. But then the rains came and threatened to just wash them away.
They'll never make it.
Dick Nunes is out there yelling, white side up. The Olympic torch, which had departed Morgedal, Norway, the cradle of winter sports, apparently, on January 31st, was carried above the North Pole by an SAS DC-7 to Los Angeles. Passed at Los Angeles International Airport to Olympic shot put champion Perry O'Brien, it was taken via helicopter to Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, where it began its journey to Squaw Valley by foot in the pouring rain, of course. Over a period of 19 days, it traversed a route scouted personally by McEvedy, past small towns that greeted it with celebrations and festivities along the way. The real surprise, however, came on February 18th, 1960, when Walt Disney and his staff awoke and were greeted by a blizzard. With the ceremony and coast-to-coast television coverage scheduled to begin at 10 a.m., the whiteout conditions presented several difficulties. Snow on the roads prevented people from making the drive to Squaw Valley, which was along a perilous road. And it also hindered the network crews and announcers from reaching their locations. 10 inches of snow fell that morning. CBS host Walter Cronkite, who was leading the TV coverage, could barely be seen amidst all the snow coming down. Many of the high school musicians hadn't dressed properly for the conditions and stood freezing to their instruments during dress rehearsal. Not that they could see the conductor through the snow anyway. Tubas filled with snow, trumpets stuck to lips. It was quite a scene. The pigeon wranglers insisted they couldn't release their birds in such weather. There were also difficulties caused by existing beefs between Northern and Southern California pigeon wranglers.
God, but those people are salty. Man, it's kind of crazy this doesn't happen more often, though, I will say, with Winter Olympics.
True. It always seems that every time there's a worry that there's not going to be enough snow or that there's going to be too much.
Right.
There's always, it's not going to snow. We're going to have to make our own. And then there's a blizzard. Someone allegedly tried to walk off beforehand with the Russian delegation's flags. That'll show them. The music students' lunches didn't arrive. It's just salt in the wound, man. At this
BS.
point.
Oh.
Vice President Richard Nixon, who had been assigned to proclaim the opening of the games, was forced to drive in from Reno as his helicopter couldn't operate under the conditions, and nobody knew if he was going to make it on time. So I'm sure he was happy. Someone had to decide what to do in all this mess. The alternative to an outdoor ceremony was a much smaller indoor ceremony, which the TV crews favored. They wanted to do that. It would be much easier. But Dr. Charles Hurt, the choral director, objected to having to leave out so many of the young musicians who had worked so hard to be part of the festivities. Art Linkletter later said that Walt remained unfazed throughout. Disney merely said that they would go on and it would hopefully clear up. Walt even recruited Linkletter into service as a television host, putting him on the air despite the fact that he was not meant to be there as a broadcaster. Walt just kind of shoved him in front of a camera.
That seems to be their rapport.
Yeah, pretty much. Although the ceremony was postponed 15 minutes to allow more spectators to arrive on the snowbound roads where bumper-to-bumper traffic extended for 12 miles outside of town, it was clear they couldn't stall forever. So finally, with everyone gathered and ready to go, the skies cleared. To everyone's astonishment, the snow ended and sunshine began, and the opening ceremonies of the 8th Winter Games were underway. Walt continued to play it cool, as if it was the plan all along. He told Linkletter, "It's just that if you live right, things happen the way they're supposed to." I wonder if Lily ever just wanted to, smack him over the head.
Yeah, right. It'd have been a real shame if they're right. Those high school kids that paid their own way all didn't get to play.
Yeah, you can imagine, the difficulty they went through, especially in that day and time, fundraising and stuff.
My tuba got filled with snow. My lips were stuck to the tuba.
Exactly.
And I couldn't even play the crummy show.
It didn't even.
No lunch? God.
Yeah. That's a burn. So festivities began. There was a sustained drum roll, raising of 30 national flags. The U.S. Marine Band played the Parade of the Olympians. And then 740 athletes entered the arena. Each national delegation was heralded by a salvo of Tommy Walker's trademark fireworks. This was advertised as the first ever use of daytime fireworks, which may have been hype, but still a very early use case. And this is, of course, a tradition that continues in Disney theme parks today.
Much ballyhooed, especially in the 1970s.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So the athletes came in, they were seated, and Prentice Hale, who was president of the Olympic Organizing Committee, delivered a welcome. Then Avery Brundage, president of the IOC, introduced Vice President Nixon, who declared the games open. Nixon had driven 46 miles through the snow from Reno to deliver a 15-word address.
Always Nixon.
Always. The massed band and chorus joined the Marine Band in playing the newly orchestrated Olympic hymn, the first time the 1896 piece had been presented at a Winter Olympics. 2,000 pigeons were released, and once they were clear, there was an 8-round cannon salute, one salvo for each of the previous Winter Olympic Games. A newly composed piece, These Things Shall Be, was then performed by the massed bands and chorus. Once planned for delivery by helicopter, the Olympic torch made the last 30 miles of its route via cross-country skier. They loved helicopters. The pageantry of helicopters was heavily embraced. Yeah. The torch arrived on site courtesy of Olympic champion Andrea Mead Champion, who appeared with the flame atop the peak of Little Papoose and blazed down the slopes accompanied by an honor guard of 8 skiers to deliver the torch to Olympic speed skater Kenneth Henry. As the massed bands played the piece Conquest, Henry lit the ceremonial torch, officially beginning the games. Chimes rang throughout the hills, and as the Marine Band performed God of Our Fathers, participants joined in the Olympic prayer, which was narrated by actor Carl Malden, who had just recently performed in Pollyanna for Disney. This was a somewhat controversial decision at the time to have this Olympic prayer. Such an event had not always been included in previous Olympics. There may have been a bit of Cold War showmanship at play here. Tommy Walker was quoted as saying that the prayer was optional, but that, quote, Walt felt that prayer represents one of the freedoms of America and that we should definitely have it.
I think it's funny they got Carl Malden to do it.
I know.
Somebody of faith. It's like,
well, and he was the preacher in Pollyanna.
Of course,
so
come see him in Pollyanna. Right.
They stayed away from a lot of Cold War posturing. In fact, they went in the opposite direction during the games because this was like a testy time. But this was one where they were like, yeah, get that in there. Mm-hmm. After the prayer, American figure skater Carol Heiss recited the Olympic oath on behalf of all the athletes. She was the first female Olympian to ever do so. And then the assembled bands performed a new orchestration of the Star-Spangled Banner. The ceremony ended appropriately with a bang. As the athletes paraded out, 30,000 balloons were released and shells were fired. Exploding with bursts of flags from each nation, they drifted back to Earth via parachutes. This is, if you find footage of this, and we'll probably show some footage at our monthly live stream, but it's really weird. It's like shells of little, like, flags hanging from parachutes with, like, sparklers. It's kind of a fun little impractical setup there. And, of course, 5 minutes after the end of the ceremony, the snow began to fall again. So the luck was on their side that day. While the 6,500 spectators fell short of projections due to the weather and traffic, the show delivered as promised. But even with all the rave reviews for what began to be called the Miracle of Squaw Valley, Walt still had tricks up his sleeve. The Squaw Valley Olympics were the first to be scheduled with live entertainment for the athletes in mind. After all, they had their dormitories in the middle of nowhere and had nothing else to do at night, so may as well give them some entertainment. And when Walt first announced his plans, he proclaimed that nothing is more important than creating lasting goodwill among our visitors, and we shall do everything we can to make their stay a happy one. And yet again, he delivered. Every night at 8, the dining hall would quickly be converted to have a stage at the end. Entertainment Vice President Art Linkletter brought in a slew of his Hollywood friends every evening, resulting in appearances by Bing Crosby, Roy Rogers, Red Skelton, and Jack Benny. It's just catnip for the kids there.
That's right.
Actress Marlene Dietrich posed for pictures with the German hockey team, and the media was well tended to thanks to official press hostess Jane Mansfield. So I'm sure they were happy about that.
Oh, yeah.
The Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts, and Sciences delivered films for the athletes, which were presented, along with free refreshments, nightly in the enclosed Olympia Theater. Disney nature films were also supplied for the athletes' enjoyment, so they could watch Perry after their day on the slopes. A standout favorite was actor Danny Kaye, who managed to lead a number of international delegations in a chorus of Row, Row, Row Your Boat. Press reports from the time described Kaye performing musical numbers in a dozen languages, including Korean, Japanese, and Russian participants in his act. He just roped everyone in. He apparently also knew the various nations' folk songs. He wove those into his act. And decades later, many of those in attendance fondly remembered Kaye's antics. Apparently, it was so popular that the room got crowded beyond its capacity, and the fire marshal showed up and tried to shut it down. When no one moved, Kaye started announcing in various languages that aisles had to be cleared for the show to go on, and eventually the fire marshal backed down. I guess he's lucky Danny Kaye didn't moon him.
Yeah, nothing like a Danny Kaye party. Everybody loves Danny Kaye.
Apparently so. You're bringing in, the kids love the Danny Kaye, so he must have been really on fuego that evening.
Sure.
On another particular memorable evening, Walt brought up the entire Golden Horseshoe Revue from Disneyland to present to the Olympians. Wally Bogue, Betty Taylor, Gene Sheldon, Henry Calvin, Don Novus, and 3 stuntmen all performed to a rapt audience, and the staged saloon brawl at the end of the evening was so raucous that a frightened security officer reportedly rushed to the phone to summon help. This is something I really wish I could have seen, just this Golden Horseshoe presentation.
Yeah, I bet people loved that from abroad. I bet that was a particular highlight.
Oh, yeah, all the people who, loved Westerns and things, as we always heard. I wonder what Sergeant Garcia had to do. I just imagine a especially wacky version of the show for this occasion. I would
sure,
love to
they
see
were
it.
elevated, yeah.
Yeah. Other nights saw talent such as actress Esther Williams, pianist George Shearing, costume designer Edith Head, who gave a sort of fashion show, and Roy Rogers and Dale Evans and the Sons of the Pioneers. Roy and the Sons of the Pioneers had, of course, narrated the Pecos Bill segment for Melody Time, so there's a connection. Actor Jerry Colonna also appeared. He had voiced the March Hare for Alice in Wonderland and narrated Casey at the Bat for Make Mine Music. He performed voices for the 1950 short The Brave Engineer. So everybody with a little Disney connection there.
Hey, that guy to be sure.
Yes, absolutely. Walt had one last idea for entertaining the participants, who, due to their own busy schedules, rarely got to see the medal ceremonies as they took place. Every evening, while emceeing that night's entertainment lineup, Linkletter would introduce the new champions who had won medals that day. They would then have a drawing, with the winner getting a free phone call home, which was a pretty amazing prize in those days, if you think about it. Like, international phone call.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
Yeah, from Squaw Valley, of all places. One evening, the winner was said to be so excited he could barely speak, and it was only when they got through to his hometown operator that he remembered his family didn't own a telephone. Walt stayed on site throughout the event, keeping an eye on things. He had a house in the valley, which he shared with his wife, Lily, Art Linkletter and his wife, and, amazingly, Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh.
Oh, wow.
I want a one-act stage play about this household during the Olympics.
Gosh.
Yeah. I don't know how he wound up with. I've yet to discover how he wound up with Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh, but I'm sure he was pleased about that.
Yes.
Just the mind reels thinking about it.
That's right.
Also staying in the Disney house was Chuck Corson, who was the director of entertainment at Disneyland beginning in 1959. For the Olympics, he served as assistant director of pageantry and narrator, which, what a great job that is, an Olympic narrator. Corson would later tell the story of how one morning Walt's driver couldn't make it to the house because of a snowstorm, so Walt insisted that Corson drive him down to the arena from the house in a small French car, which they had for some reason, and along the way, they ran off the road into a snowdrift. And according to Corson, Walt thought it was hilarious and started laughing his head off.
Sounds about right.
Chuck, you about killed me.
I got to tell this story about this guy.
This guy's trying to bump off the boss. Incidentally, Corson would later work on the Lake Placid and 1984 Los Angeles Olympics, as well as Liberty Weekend. Never forget Liberty Weekend.
Always Liberty Weekend.
Always.
Forever and always. Yes.
So after 10 days in Squaw Valley, 665 athletes from 30 nations had competed in 27 events, and it was time to return home. On February 28th, 20,000 spectators filled the stands of Blythe Memorial Arena to witness the closing ceremonies. Flag bearers surrounded the rostrum as the national anthems of Greece, the United States, and Austria were played. IOC President Brundage declared the games closed, and the Olympic torch was extinguished. Thousands of balloons were released to end the ceremony. There's Tommy Walker at work again. After the games, some Olympians went to Disneyland, where it was reported that a Norwegian speed skater was afraid to go on the teacups. The reporters always love to know who was up for the teacups.
Yeah.
I was always a focus of discussion. Disney's Olympics, the largest winter games held to that point, received rave reviews. The once skeptical IOC chair would go on to say that they were the greatest games ever staged. IOC Committee Chancellor Otto Meyer, who had objected to the showbiz flair and said he was afraid the Olympics would turn into another Disneyland, changed his tune after the games and said it was all magnificent. Army Archerd in Variety called Disney's opening ceremony the greatest show on earth, and a reporter for the Los Angeles Times proclaimed that, quote, "It is my conviction that you'll never see anything of that kind so well done in your lifetime." So they were excited. Nixon even had kind words, citing the great beauty and clockwork precision of the dramatic pageantry, which was produced by the incomparable Disney touch. Even the Russians were impressed. One of the heads of their delegation approached an Olympic security chief and asked what chemicals had been used to control the weather during the opening ceremony. I see the contrails. I know what you do. So the 1960 Olympic Winter Games would cast a long shadow, influencing the look and feel of the games up to this day. Many of Disney's teams, as we've said, would contribute to future Olympics, notably the 1984 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles. Other effects of the game were more esoteric. 25 trophies were given out afterwards to racing pigeon clubs that had participated, and a large perpetual annual award, the Walt Disney Trophy, was established for the best pigeon flyer in California.
Oh, there you go.
I love all the random trophies named for, I think there's like a lawn bowling association out there, because he liked lawn bowling. So there's like a Walt Disney lawn bowling trophy too. So he casts a shadow.
That's right.
The events of Squaw Valley would also affect Walt. It marked the first time he had met the world outside of Disneyland and began the outreach efforts he would continue in 1964 at the New York World's Fair. The 1960 Games also introduced Walt to Willie Scheffler, who served there as director of ski events. Scheffler was a colorful character who quickly became fast friends with Walt. In fact, Diane Disney Miller once called him one of the giants of her family's life. Scheffler would be a key advisor in Walt's follow-up to the Olympics, the concerted effort to build his own winter sports resort at Mineral King in California, a project he would pursue for the rest of his life.
So the days pass far too quickly and the grand spectacle is over. But at Squaw Valley, the facilities and the opportunity for wonderful winter sports remain, as they do at other national forests throughout this big country of ours. If you'd like to count them, as of this moment, there are 177 winter sports areas in all on some 85 of the national forests, a great training ground for our American youngsters. I've been to most of these myself, and they are indeed magnificent. It's good to realize that these national forests are ours to use, ours to enjoy. What greater delight for man, woman, and child than the wonders of America's winter playgrounds. So long.
In the annals of unbuilt Disney attractions and destinations, there is a special place in our hearts for those developed in the mid-1960s. On the heels of the Squaw Valley Olympics, Walt and his Imagineers set their sight on the great outdoors and developed a year-round destination for skiing and recreation. The site of Mineral King in California was chosen for a revolutionary family vacation destination that was never to be, and the story of its development and eventual cancellation is fascinating in its own right. Authors Greg Glasgow and Kathryn Mayer have taken on the telling of the story in their book Disneyland on the Mountain, Walt, the Environmentalist, and the Ski Resort That Never Was. Greg and Kathryn take us from that which helped form the idea for Walt for this destination through its development, demise, and influence on the Disney world as well as governmental policy and the environmental movement. And we are fortunate enough to have Greg and Kathryn here on the podcast. Greg and Kathryn, welcome to the Progress City Radio Hour.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so excited to talk with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you all. This is a subject that has interested us for years. Mineral King, I mean, gosh, it's a really interesting story. It was being developed at a time in the mid-'60s where Walt was working on what came after Disneyland. And he had a lot of inspiring ideas. Walt Disney World and Epcot, of course, but also CalArts and Mineral King were part of the same wave of development Walt had in mind. Mixed up in all these developments were proposed solutions to societal problems that he saw. And this is also a unique time for the environmental movement, as Silent Spring had been published in 1962 and had jump-started some environmental awareness that would only grow through the decade. And this project lay at the vertex of these two idealistic interests. This book takes on the point of view of these and other concerns at the Mineral King property. So it's really a story told from several different angles.
Yeah, that was a challenge and a deliberate choice at some point where we realized there was so many, we kind of came into it maybe as on the Disney fan side, but certainly started to slowly realize or quickly realize that there was sort of, the two sides and trying to switch perspectives back and forth. I think that was kind of an aha moment of like, okay, that'll really, help to give a well-rounded picture of this whole situation.
Yeah. And it was one of those things where, I mean, there's so many, if you're thinking of like a classic Disney story, there's this good versus evil, right? And there's the villains. And this story was obviously real life, but it wasn't, there really was no deliberate, there's really no villain here. I mean, what we talked about, it was very genuine for Walt. He was very excited by this. It was something that he felt extremely passionate about. And the environmental movement was extremely, obviously, very important to our society, extremely important to the U.S. and to our history, and just it was pivotal at that moment in time. So we really wanted to have, present both sides with equal weight, and it kind of told hopefully a more interesting story in the, and how we told it, kind of alternating those perspectives.
Yeah, I think it does. It's absolutely interesting as somebody who really cares about the environmental movement, seeing how much came from this actual thing that I was interested in as a Disney fan was just fascinating. But I do want to start with Disney. I think it's interesting in explaining what the Mineral King would be. He said a few things that I thought was worth note. I'm going to quote them. One was, quote, a year-round recreational facility for everyone, regardless of age, income, leisure time interest, or athletic abilities. And the other one from Walt, and this you all compiled from several interviews, it's, quote, we will stay close to God in our development and try to complement the work he has done in this magnificent place, he said at the time. A recreation project, not an entertainment center. There will be no Hollywood flourishes, and the name Disney won't be a part of it. Of course, our company will run the operation, but it is strictly a natural theme based on the beauty of the country. I think these quotes really illustrate kind of a misconception of a lot of people at the time had about the nature of this development and the kind of ideals that Walt had going into it.
Oh, absolutely. It was in our title of our book is very tongue in cheek too, and kind of points to that, Disneyland on the Mountain, because that was fear that everyone had. It was like, oh my God, Disney's going to come into this thing. They're going to build roller coasters, attractions, and all this crazy stuff, and just throw it in, this beautiful nature area. And that wasn't what they were planning to do. And this, again, I'd mentioned before, this was a huge passion project of Walt. And we learned, I consider myself a Disney person. I grew up with Disney. I've read tons of books on Disney, especially a big fan of Walt, as many of us are. And just learning so much about what he wanted and what he wanted to accomplish with this Mineral King development, and how important it was to him. And, we talk about a lot in the book about how his True Life Adventure series, for example, and how he really wanted to showcase animals and nature and get people very familiar with them and use them as education tools. And he said many times that creating those nature documentaries were actually more important to him than anything else he created at the time, which
right.
Wow. And so this Mineral King project was another was another step in that direction. And that's kind of how we viewed it, especially doing the research that we did it. And it was just extremely important to Walt, and thus eventually was extremely important to the Disney company, who then wanted, his legacy to actually happen in this way.
Yeah, you all point this out very well, that Walt was a hero to conservationists in the 40s and 50s through these True Life Adventures and another work he had, and was a real ally to the environmental movement. But before it even caught fire, it was even Bambi. You go back that far, it was a priority of his as well, environmental stewardship.
Yeah, it certainly was. I mean, all the way back from, we talked about his boyhood on the farm in Marceline, and what that meant to him over the years, and the fact that so many of the early Disney shorts and even Snow White have animals in there. It was just a big interest of his for so long, and this conservation stuff. And I think when Disney Plus came out and they put all the True Life Adventures movies up there for streaming, but there wasn't even a huge amount of explanation of what they were. It's kind of like, what are these old weird wildlife documentaries doing on Disney Plus? Then when you delve into it and see the history of it, and like Kathryn said, what it meant to him, I mean, it is really cool aspect of him that we certainly didn't know a whole lot about. And, just to explore that and tell that side of him some more in the book was a cool thing to be able to do.
Yeah, you all did a great job at that. Well, Mineral King would develop into many different iterations. And in general, what would a trip to Mineral King have been like?
They went through iterations for sure in terms of especially transportation. One of the big controversies was this all-weather highway they wanted to build that would have gone through Sequoia National Park. But I mean, really what it would have looked like in the initial sort of idea that Walt had would be that you would drive your car, a little bit of the way up toward this ski area, park in an underground parking garage, take a cog railway train up into the resort itself, and there would have been, as you said, skiing for all ages, all abilities. Would have been quite different than a lot of the other ski resorts at the time that were really designed for experienced athletic skiers. I mean, this could have been a place that you could bring the whole family. There would have been opportunities and activities for non-skiers. There would have been, multiple hotels, multiple restaurants, kind of what we think of as the modern ski resort today, but at the time really wasn't as common, especially in the US. And, there would have been the hills for all the different abilities and what they called snow play activities, inner tubing, ice skating, dog sledding, tobogganing, all these different things. And of course, the shops, the restaurants, a movie theater really would have been a true resort where you could bring the family and stay for a number of days.
It's just fascinating to think about what it would have been like. And it definitely shares a lot of that DNA with Walt Disney World. I mean, the kind of vacation kingdom that they had at Disney World when it opened, with all the boating and swimming and all that stuff. And they also had the secretive land deals to acquire the surrounding property, and obviously the infrastructure and transportation. These two seem directly linked to me.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, we're talking, to put this in context of the timing, this was they started this journey in the 1960s, and they were still planning this well into the 1970s. The dream really ended in the late 1970s. So this was only a few years after Disneyland opened, and this was being planned in tandem with Walt Disney World. So you are seeing so many of those similarities. And we wrote about in the book, which you mentioned, the secretive land deals, which was so fascinating because, anyone who's familiar with a lot of Disney parks lore and the history there, we know that Walt was pretty disappointed in what happened at Disneyland. He got a little bit of that land. Obviously, things got built up right around it and, basically kind of trashed the area in some ways.
Yeah.
Like Walt wanted. And, you go to Disneyland even still today and you're seeing, kind of strip mall type things and things that Walt certainly didn't want to happen. So he didn't want this to have the same mistake with Mineral Cane. So he started kind of, secretly scooping up land more than I think that they needed. And, roughly at the same time, he was doing that in Florida as well. So it was really interesting. And yeah, a lot of similarities, even with the lodging, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
With Disneyland, there was, I think at the time, there was the Disneyland Hotel that had just opened, and that was all that there was. It wasn't even owned by Disney for a while. And when they were planning Mineral Cane, one of the things we were, combing through all these annual reports and reports on Mineral Cane, they wanted to make this, when we talk about accessibility, yes, it was certainly, to have this area be accessible to everyone of different athletic abilities and stuff like that, but also of different economic levels. So they actually had a number of different lodging that they were planning to build and promote that, people could stay there for X number of dollars a night or go somewhere and stay somewhere at one of the much nicer hotels. So that was an interesting thing that they did too, that of course then we saw with Walt Disney World in later years.
Right. And even in the initial plans of Walt Disney World that didn't get built, Walt's time, they were also making these plans for motels there that would be more affordable. So that was clearly a priority of his. Yeah, that translated to both places.
Those were the days, right?
Yeah, right. Hard to imagine, but yeah. Well, at the same time, the Sierra Club was undergoing a transformation in its own right. They were defining whether they stood more for outdoor recreation or conservation. In the middle of this was oddly enough, of geologist for Standard Oil, which I thought was one of the most interesting things I read, who began sleuthing around about Disney's interest in Mineral King. That was John Harper. I was shocked to see how low the odds for this development encountering resistance were at the beginning. It's really just a few people who know and enjoy Mineral King who made so much happen to force this change.
Yeah, it was really interesting to see that. And John Harper was definitely the guy that kind of sounded the alarm early on and really was sort of, pushed aside a little bit by the Sierra Club. I don't know if they just, didn't see it as a priority or didn't exactly understand the import of it. But yeah, I mean, it was even probably 62, 63 that he began to hear these rumors that Disney was actually looking to build a monorail into the Mineral King area, which seems kind of bizarre that they would even consider building a monorail through like a forest. But I mean, maybe they looked at it. But yeah, and then he, this was to him and a lot of the Sierra Club was such like a sacred place. He refers to it, and he self-published a book all about his experiences with Mineral King that we use as a great reference for our book. But he referred to it as his own personal Shangri-La. And that Disney, was looking at it. I mean, of course, like Kathryn said, everyone at that point thought of Disney, Disneyland, and all the commercial development, and really was started to say, oh my God, what are they going to do here? And it took a while for them to kind of listen, but then they eventually had to really decide, like you said, I mean, were they a conservation organization? Were they a recreation organization? There's an interesting part of the book where we kind of go into the fact that the Sierra Club had actually sort of given their approval to this area as a ski resort about 15 or so years earlier than when Walt sort of won the rights to develop it. So there was a big upheaval in the club even then to say, can we go back on our word now? We already kind of said it was okay, and now we're saying it's not okay. So yeah, definitely the times were changing for the Sierra Club and trying to figure out what they stood for and kind of whether they needed to abide by what they'd said in the past or had times changed enough that it was, time to take a different kind of stand.
Yeah, it's funny. I read this book of yours before we were doing the rest of the episode that this is going to be in which we're talking about the Matterhorn. And at the opening of the Matterhorn, they have all these people from the Sierra Club climbing the Matterhorn in Disneyland, which is so funny to me. And they're like, yeah, we're out here just climbing, it's our hiking club essentially. But, obviously they went on to have much bigger impact, and thank goodness.
Oh, yeah. That was right in the time that they gave Walt their honorary lifetime membership award was in 55, the same year that so it's like
so funny. Yeah.
A decade, and now they're like fighting them. Yeah, pretty wild.
There's a lot of funny ironies in this story, and that was definitely one of the biggest.
Yeah,
right.
Was the award that Walt had the Sierra Club.
I mean, some of this reminds me of when they were developing Disney's America, where a few people started real staunch resistance to Disney. There was a lot of conjecture about what would happen, a lot of poking fun at Disney and what they stood for. It seems like at the Mineral King, the people who vacationed at Mineral King were very active in the opposition. What can you tell us about them?
Yeah, that was a really interesting part of the book. It was, it's weird to think about because it really wasn't this completely unspoiled wilderness area. There was some development there. It had been a mining community back in like the late 1800s and had undergone some different sort of smaller resorts and things like that over the years. And by the time the 60s rolled around, there was like 65 or so cabins there that these families had come to for, a lot of them had been in the families for decades. And of course, those people were quite concerned about what this was going to mean to them in terms of whirling machinery in their backyard and thousands of people coming to this area every winter, and what it would mean for their cabins and stuff if those would be torn down. So yeah, those people, along with the Sierra Club, were really right on the front lines of fighting against that.
And some of those cabin owners also were weirdly members of the Sierra Club. So
yeah.
weren't, but there is So there's a lot of interesting connections there. But the cabin owner part was extremely fascinating to us. It seemed, the Sierra Club obviously had a lot of motives for and reasons for why they didn't want this built. But of course, those who had the history and who had lived there for many years and had cabins, who had been in the families for so many years, of course, those reasons were a lot more personal. So you really, your heart kind of, tugged for some of these people. One of the really interesting characters and people that we wrote quite a bit about in the book was a woman named Jean Koch. And, people could certainly read about her, hopefully, if they want to read the book. But she was a cabin owner, and she had started going to Mineral King even when she was a young girl with her parents, actually. And then she got married, and her husband bought a cabin, and they had gone there. They lived in LA for part of the year, and they would go to Mineral King. But she was really a fun person to talk with and to write about, because she basically really kickstarted a lot of these resistance movements that were happening in the 60s and 70s against the Disney development. And she would lead different protests, like you said, very, very kind of similar to Disney's America project. And she would lead these protests. She wrote tons of different letters, and she created a newsletter even, and basically said, like, here's why this can't happen. Here's things we could do. Here's Disney President Card Walker's address. So she would do this like crazy stuff. And it was really kind of fun to write about her. But and she actually would be in communication too with a lot of these Disney folks. I can't even imagine nowadays if we're talking about something and I'm like, oh, I'm talking to Iger tomorrow about so and
right.
All these people were really listening to some of them, which is crazy.
Well, it was such a different organization at that time, but I mean, yeah, I think it's so interesting to think about these places, and you talk about Disneyland and people like the Domingos family that ended up being really grafted into Disneyland, and they, their land became Disneyland, and there's all kinds of stories of Walt Disney World, and then there's these people where these projects don't work out, and it's just interesting to see what happens on that land that you think about, you know about Mineral King and all this stuff, but you don't think about, well, people were actually up there and had inhabited it for so long, and it was, personal to them, like you said. So,
yeah, certainly. And I think, of course, the bigger picture too is the timing of this as well. Is, we're seeing so much momentum grow about land. Every piece of land should not be developed. How do we save some? What are we going to do about it? How are we going to think about building on some of these precious areas? And a lot of questions about air quality and water quality and everything like that. So that certainly heightened all this conversation. And I think that, whether it was unfair or not, that kind of came down on Disney because of where we were, I think, in the time of U.S. history.
Right. Yeah. And this would go on for years and years and years. It's amazing to me how long Disney just sits on the sidelines while the Sierra Club and the federal government litigate. And, the court of public opinion. And Disney's kind of like, well, we're ready whenever it can happen, and they start to develop their own other plan. We can talk about that in a second, but there was a fairly revolutionary court case, one that would affect how the Sierra Club works down to this day. And I couldn't believe, as someone who donates to Earth Justice, as I do, that it's directly tied into this story. I wonder if you could share a bit about that.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the things that we didn't know a whole lot about. And, I think this prevailing wisdom or prevailing story about Mineral King that, Disney tried to do this and didn't really work out, and they just kind of walked away from it. I mean, there's a lot more to the story than that, including this lawsuit that, the Sierra Club first in 1965 was the year that Walt won the rights to develop this area for skiing from the Forest Service. This was on Forest Service land, by the way, which we should mention. It wasn't, Walt didn't just kind of waltz into the woods and find a spot, that he wanted to build on. This is actually land that they had put up for bid, and Walt won the bid in 65, which is the same year the Sierra Club started to oppose it. And they spent the next about 4 years or so, various grassroots efforts to stop it. Walt died in the middle of that, unfortunately, but the plans continued with Disney. And then the Sierra Club in 1969, having really gotten nowhere with the grassroots stuff, decided to take a legal route, and really was one of the first cases that they had done like this, a big environmental case against a company like Disney. Although I should clarify that Disney actually wasn't named in the lawsuit. The lawsuit was against the Forest Service and the Park Service, really, for sort of allowing this to happen. But that case ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court, and the court ruled in favor of the resort going forward, which is kind of another surprise that you might think that, Disney must have lost the case. That must be why there's no Mineral King resort. But actually, the court did rule in favor of the resort going forward, but it just got wrapped up, like you said, in more litigation, more delays, and things like that. But what really came out of it for the Sierra Club was kind of, this new roadmap for how you litigate an environmental case, and this idea that you don't really need to necessarily show personal sort of effect. This idea that wilderness should be able to sort of advocate for itself and be its own defense in some ways, and just it's enough to say you want to protect the beauty of a land without having to show that you're going to be personally or financially harmed by a development.
Yeah, and that was revolutionary. And I think part of that, William Douglas, the Supreme Court justice, who was, he's like the longest term Supreme Court justice, was a real historic figure. He was right there and kind of paved the way for, thank goodness, all kinds of great litigation that would come after. So, it's funny, this thing that I'm like, I wish they would have built Mineral King. And then it's part of this whole thing that was really a great outcome as well. Yeah,
Douglas was an interesting, and kind of like Walt, he was another early environmentalist, and he was actually in the Sierra Club for a long time, and he gave up his membership in the club maybe a few years before this case because he knew that the times were changing. He knew that a big environmental case was going to come in front of the Supreme Court sooner than later, and he really wanted to be part of it, and he didn't want to have any kind of conflict of interest by being a member of the Sierra Club. But yeah, I mean, his ruling or his opinion in this case was a dissent, but it really had more sort of long-lasting impact than the actual decision. So it's kind of interesting. That's interesting.
Right. Well, Disney would move on to develop Independence Lake, which we talked about along with Mineral King a little bit with Frank Stanek in our episode 5, our first snow show. According to Frank, Hard Walker was dead set on seeing this ski project through as another kind of directive from Walt, but Disney also didn't seem to have the appetite for the bad press they were getting from these protests. It's interesting, the Sierra Club's kind of not wanting to name Disney, right? They go after the federal government because they're afraid of the good name that Disney has, and then Disney kind of doesn't want to sully their name because they're starting to get called out. So it's an interesting kind of back and forth, tiptoeing around this project that they had.
Yeah, it was. They didn't want I don't remember. I'm trying to remember exactly what the quote was, but the Sierra Club member, one of the members, the Sierra Club at the time when they were bringing this case to court and trying to stop it legally, they did not want to sue Disney because they said it was like suing the Boy Scouts and Mother Earth and apple pie or something like that. Knowing, how beloved Disney was, especially Walt and his legacy. I think now I think people sometimes like to hate on Disney a little bit, a little bit more. So I would imagine that obviously would change, but back then, especially they really didn't want to do that. And I think that was an interesting move. Certainly. And I think Disney kind of welcomed it because they didn't want their name tied up
Yeah.
But, a lot of people were, of course, in the Disney community and even Disney shareholders. There was this annual shareholders meeting at the time. And even though Disney was not named in the suit, a lot of the shareholders were bringing this up, and it was a very boisterous conversation. A lot of concerns about obviously the optics. Even though they weren't named, it was more or less like they felt like they were getting the project obviously was getting sued. They felt like they were getting sued to stop this. And so, I mean, they were certainly concerned about it, but they kind of made the deliberate choice to step back a little bit
Mm-hmm.
for a little while just to kind of let things settle. There were some things happening at that time, and they were standing up a little bit for the project. But then after that court decision came, weirdly enough, that's actually when they stepped up a little bit in kind of their defense. And it was Disney president Card Walker who certainly was standing up for this Mineral King project, which was so fun and fascinating to write about. He did some interesting.
Yeah, he did. Card Walker, an interesting guy. Well, fortunately, Mineral King and Independence Lake were preserved and not handed off to some developer later with a worse plan. I kept on thinking, like, I don't know what happens to Independence Lake, but it's pretty preserved. I mean, sometimes that happens, and it's unfortunate. They fight it off, and then they end up handing it off. But these are two preserved places. But you all raised an interesting philosophical question the Forest Service was wrestling with, whether to completely preserve and thus allow access to smaller groups of people, or allow access to responsible developers and thus a lot more people, letting them have access to these amazing places. It seems like that's kind of what they were wrestling with at the time.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's even the proposals that they got in 65, including Disney's, I think really, as we say in the book, they really exceeded what the Forest Service thought was going to be the case. They were viewing I think they said, a few thousand people at a time, something like that. Disney's estimating 50,000 people at a time, or just something crazy. So, it was interesting to see sort of that split also between the Forest Service and the Park Service. That the Forest Service had this sort of responsibility in a way to develop and do things that were going to bring people in and were going to make money and stuff like that. But I think, there haven't been a lot of big ski resorts that have opened, I think on forest lands sort of since that time. So I think that was another lesson learned for them, was just that some of these big projects were just not that feasible.
Right.
Well, when you were bringing up about the accessibility, I mean, having that kind of question of, is this right or what? It was such an interesting point. And I think it's still one of those things that everyone kind of discusses still to this day. What should we develop? What should we not? Because I do think, as someone who tries to advocate for people with disabilities and people, of people of different, all ages and things like that, the people who were able to access Mineral King, and still actually to this day, because it's actually very difficult to get to, were people who were very athletic and people who were, putting on their snowshoes and kind of going up miles and miles.
Right.
And camping and things like that. And obviously not everyone could do that, right? And, even people with families and small children, I mean, that makes it very difficult. And so obviously to build something and to actually have, lodging and all these things and things that people could maybe go see and are able to enjoy this area, but maybe not, ski and hike, tons of, miles and stuff like that, I think is an important thing to consider.
Well, and two, it seemed tailor-made for it with the way that plot of land had been developed and kind of left to lie fallow for the most part, had been recommended by the Sierra Club. And I do think it's just a really compelling vision that Walt laid out of, anybody can go, all kinds of activities, be there. So, yeah, I mean, It's interesting to think about, would it have been successful? I mean, do you all think it would have been built if Walt would have lived, or do you think that the result was inevitable?
Sure. We talk about that. We've talked about that a lot, and I think we still go back and forth on this because
Yeah.
it's if Walt was such this affable, likable guy for the most part, and he was very well respected by the Sierra Club. And I think some of this controversy and resistance was really just bubbling up at the beginning to the effect to where he was starting, I think, from our understanding, was starting to grow aware of it, but not anywhere near where it was, after his death. And so we certainly wonder exactly what could have happened. And I think that if he sat down perhaps with some of these people and that were against it, and maybe there was going to be some kind of a middle ground that they would have reached, I do think that would have been a fair possibility, to be honest. But again, it was a tough time, because I think that people really thought that stopping this mineral cane development was really indicative of how important, quote unquote, saving land and things like that was at the time. So we really kind of go back and forth. But I think that it was, to use the cliche, I think Walt's death was one of the nails in that coffin for the Mineral Cane Project. And I don't think it was the nail in the coffin even the year he died. I think it actually, it just kind of had the effect even years later, when just the fact that he wasn't around to stop some of it.
Yeah. And I think his constant kind of evolving and what he wanted to offer, being able to be there to explain it, would have certainly helped. But like you said, I mean, it's like you get further into the 60s, the environmental movement becomes very strong, and this becomes kind of an icon for what they're doing. It's
100%. Exactly.
Yeah, I think and it had to be a little deliberate to choose a Disney project, I think, is the flagship case. And it's also interesting. I mean, we did so much research, obviously, for this book. And a lot of the research we did was looking at newspaper articles and things like that from the time this was happening. I mean, and along with the resistance came this big shift, like you said, in public opinion. I mean, from 1965, when it was all the newspaper coverage was so glowing and so, oh my God, Walt Disney is going to build this. It's going to be awesome. It's going to create jobs and bring in money. And it's going to be this wonderful tourism draw. And then, 5-10 years later, there's such a different take, even from the news, in terms of how they were covering it, how they were writing about it, and the sort of disillusionment, or sort of this idea that they started to side more with the environmental side. So, I think, like you said, the movement, the horse was out of the barn in some ways with that movement. So it's hard to know if anything could have really stopped it, because it seems so inevitable in some ways, the way that it all happened.
Yeah. And on that note, I will say that it was in 1965, I believe, when the bids were being delivered for, who was going to develop this, because there were actually a few different bids, including Walt's bid, and people could read about that in the book. But in 65, Walt came to hand deliver what he wanted to create. And even the people who were inside Mineral Cane, who lived there part-time, we talked to actually a couple people, including, I think, some young, who were young kids at the time. And at the beginning, they said that people who, again, were in Mineral Cane, living there, or at least around the surrounding areas and the towns outside of Mineral Cane, were like screaming for Walt. They had banners and they had signs, and they were saying, like, there he is. Like, they were all super excited, because Walt was a beloved guy. He was a celebrity in his own right, of course. He was on the wonderful world of Disney, and he had his Sunday night shows and everything like that. And so people were really excited that he was there, and they were excited about what he was going to create. And then, of course, a few years later, the sentiment certainly shifted. But at that moment in time, they were, a lot of them, I mean, of course, not everybody, but a lot of them were pretty excited.
Yeah. And you would think if Walt had a few more years to live, it would have been interesting to see what he could have accomplished there and otherwise. Well, yeah, I mean, we were just scratching the surface here. There's plenty more for people to read about in this book, and I can't recommend enough. I mean, the story of the bids is incredible. There's so many interesting little cul-de-sacs and streams to this story. But I'm curious how you all came to this subject and what caused you to write about it.
For me, I certainly grew up with Disney. Like I said, I grew up going to the parks, and with my family, we would go to Walt Disney World. That was where we went for vacation all the time, and certainly grew up with the movies and the shows and everything like that. I was an 80s and 90s kid. So a lot of that resurgence, and so I always loved Disney, and I never grew out of it. Like a lot of us, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I really was taken with Disney history, especially, and a lot of, the 1960s, 1950s, 1960s, the creation of the parks and Walt and Roy and everything like that. And I and Greg were both journalists by trade. And it wasn't like we were setting out to write a book necessarily or anything like that. We just kind of fell on this topic a little bit and said, hey, let's try to write this thing. But the backstory specifically of us writing about the Mineral King Project was in a few years back, 2018, I think. The two of us were in San Francisco, and we had gone to the Walt Disney Family Museum. And there was this, for whoever has gone to this museum, which is remarkable, but they have a big timeline of Walt Disney and his accomplishments there. And it had a very small mention, I mean, a sentence or two perhaps, about the Mineral King Project. And it had mentioned a man named Willie Schaeffler, who then became a character, main character in our book. And Willie Schaeffler we knew his name because he was a famous Colorado skier. Greg and I live in Colorado. And he also was the head ski coach at the University of Denver for many years. And he won championship after championship. And it said on this timeline that Walt Disney and Willie Schaeffler tried to create this Mineral King Project together. And I'd never heard of this. And I had, and the University of Denver is my alma mater. Greg and I had both worked there. We worked for the University of Denver magazine for quite a few years. And I was like, how did I not know about this? How did Willie Schaeffler have some connection with Walt Disney? And, what exactly were they trying to do? And so we basically just became obsessed with this story, is more or less what happened. And, basically tried to find what we could about the Mineral King Project. But, if you look, you do a cursory internet search on the Mineral King Project, you'll find actually a lot of misconceptions too, which is sometimes Walt Disney, Walt Disney dies, this never happened. And it doesn't go into anything about the legal battle. It has a lot of wrong information if you do a lot of cursory internet searches on the Mineral King Project. So we just basically kept digging and digging, and we're spurred by this, Colorado connection and this DU connection and this guy that, we had certainly heard a lot about, and finding out exactly what happened. And we really became just hooked on this story and realized that even though there, of course, there's a little bit of information about this Mineral King Project, there wasn't something that told the whole story. And so we set out to tell it and tried to turn this into a book. And here we are. So we were really, it was really just more or less us being very excited about this story and really mildly, well, not mildly, just becoming obsessed with it.
Absolutely. It's always fun to go down the rabbit hole. I mean, and thinking about these people like Willie Schaeffler who were so involved, but, would never kind of get the credit for all the, work he did on this. And again, all the, something we're very familiar with, all the misinformation on the internet about certain things. So I really appreciate you all drilling down on this. It's just such an interesting tale. And I, again, encourage everybody to read their book. It's Disneyland on the Mountain. Greg and Kathryn, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us and for your great questions and your interest in this. It's always cool to talk to, Disney people that know this story and kind of understand a little more about what we were trying to do and just all the rich history of the whole saga that we tried to tell.
Yeah, and certainly people who are excited about, those Disney projects that never happen. Certainly.
This is one for you. So yeah, check out the book wherever books are sold online. Thank you all again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
So that wraps up our second snow show. Michael, what do you say?
Getting a little chilly, but I like it. It's time to hit the lodge for some cocoa, and these are some of my favorite projects to talk about, as you can probably tell.
Well, Michael, we talked about it with Kathryn and Greg. I want to ask you: do you think Mineral King gets built with Walt alive? Yay or nay?
I think probably so. I think he had cachet and an ability to bring people along that maybe the company didn't have without him. And I think Disney, the person, was probably more appealing to people than, Disney, the entity. So I think had he been around, more people would have gotten on board, and I'm sure the people that objected would still object, but I think it probably would have happened.
He was a very convincing man. Well, and he was regarded as an environmentalist, so I think he would have swung a lot of weight in that world as well.
Right. Well, and he would have played along with them because he cared about these things. When you go back and look at early publicity for Walt Disney World, so much of the talk is about environmental conservation in a time when that was not yet as hot button as it would come to be. They were way ahead of the curve on that. So I think he would have been a willing and able partner to, do it right, because they made a really concerted effort to do it right.
Well, Michael, I thought it was so wonderful. The Christmas episode, we had so many great reviews for the book giveaway. We want to thank everybody who participated in that. It was a lot of fun to see those come in, and it was so fun, in fact, you had the idea of doing another book giveaway.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been having authors on, so why not share a little love with the listeners? So thankfully, Greg and Kathryn were kind enough to offer us a copy of their book, Disneyland on the Mountain, to give away to one of our listeners. So we're going to do it again. I like this sharing. This is good.
This is great. Everybody wins.
Absolutely. So last time we asked for people to send in screen caps of reviews, which you did, and were very kind, and we appreciate that. This time we're going to do a little something different. We want to get the mailbag going here. So send in a mailbag question. It can be about anything, and we'll sift through those and have sort of reader mail feature, perhaps. And send that in to podcast@progresscityusa.com with the title Mineral King, and we'll enter you in the drawing and say maybe by the end of February 28th, that sounds about right, get in your questions and your emails, and we'll have another drawing and get that out to one lucky listener.
That sounds great. We thank Kathryn and Greg for letting us have a copy of their book to send out. It's very exciting. We will also accept 5-star reviews if you didn't do that before, and, in general. But yeah, it'd be fun to get the mailbag back going, and it's a really great book, as we've said. So we hope you all enjoy it. Look forward to hearing from you. Once again, that's podcast@progresscityusa.com. Michael, it's that time of the show where we check in with our Patreon, see if anybody's joined up since we last checked.
Yes, we'd like to welcome Chris to our Patreon backers. Thanks for joining up. Chris will be joining all of our other backers in getting early access to content, exclusive content, access to, my little hidden library of Disney documents that I've made available to our backers. And at the silver level, of course, will be joining us for our monthly live stream, which we'll have coming up again soon, where we, look at all sorts of exclusive images and video and have a great little chat, have a good old time in the chat with everybody. And I'm looking forward to getting back to that after our little holiday break.
I know. It's always nice to visit with the folks and cook up some, sometimes truly bizarre things, sometimes nostalgic, and always in between those kind of polls.
Absolutely. So if you're interested in all of that, join us at patreon.com/progresscityusa, and your donation is tax deductible.
We thank you all who have already joined up. We thank all of you for listening. If you'd like to get in touch with us, Michael already mentioned our email. It's podcast@progresscityusa.com. Help us get that mailbag flowing. And you can also reach us on Twitter. He's at progresscityusa. I am at Jeff G. Crawford. I had to think about it for a second. We're there. And of course, there's a Discord if you become a Patreon member.
How could I forget the Discord? Yeah, you get an invitation to our private Discord, which is always a fun time. I feel like it's picking up all the time.
It is. And, by the time this comes out, if not just a little bit later, I'll be down at Disney World sending all kinds of stuff to the Discord. So I'm excited to be down there again and to share some of that with people.
Yeah,
as everybody, our Discord's always full with somebody's always at Disney World on our Discord.
That's true.
It's just a bet. Anything else to say before we, hit the lodge and dry off our wet socks?
No, I'm just looking forward to kicking back with the toddy and watching the Country Bears perform. Little Lemonade Bear and Friends.
That's right. Well, stay tuned. You never know what's coming up. We got some plans. I could get a little wet out there. You never know. Say no more. But until then, from all of us to all of you, stay safe. Hope you take care, and we will see you soon. So long.
Right now, it's time to go. Remember,
everything you've seen here in our all-electric city is really possible today.
So if you know any cities looking for a new springtime of progress, tell them about Progress City. Thanks for joining us.
Our time is at an end. We'll be seeing you again next time at Progress.
been listening to the Progress City Radio Hour, created by the folks at ProgressCityUSA.com. We're also on Facebook and Twitter at Progress City USA. If you want to contact us, please write podcast at ProgressCityUSA.com. The Progress City Radio Hour is recorded at Arbor Ridge Studios in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, on the web at arborridgestudios.com. The title theme was composed by Jeff Crawford, whose music can be found at jeffcrawfordmusic.com. Please join us again soon for another Progress City Radio Hour. They call